That should
See a
have done.
button for start recording.
Okay.
You started it? Okay.
Yep.
Thank you.
Okay. Well, I guess we will go ahead and get started, just with a few introductions, and people can join in, and we can always fill in people that have to hop in a little bit later. Well, I guess thank you for everybody joining in. This is kind of Christy and I's brainchild to do these little refresher courses. We may do them periodically throughout the year when issues come up that we kind of want to go through. And some may be just for MPO staff. We may add in people as needed to whatever the pertinent information is going to come up. Some of you may be aware we've done Campo throughout the years. So it's kind of a Campo-like topic. So this is kind of taking the place a little bit. So my name is Allison Smith. I'm an environmental coordinator / MPO liaison. I do wear multiple hats. Environmental coordinator, Title VI. I deal with CMAQ, a host of many things, environmental related, and electric vehicles is a new thing that I'm working on with Matt. So many things. And then I work under Matt, but co-hosting this refresher is my counterpart, who I will let her, and I've been with KDOT for almost 15 years, so bunch of experience. So if you ever have any questions, let me know. And I work with, I should say that too, I work primarily with Mark, Lawrence, and St. Joe, who is also one of our MPOs. So.
Allison, we're getting a little bit of.
Yeah,
I'm getting you too. Okay, I'm going to ask.
I just went for the full mute across the board, Christy. So you'll just need to
Matt
unmute
just
yourself.
made a decision. All right. Well, my name is Christy Wilson, and I've been with KDOT 3 years, but I've actually been with the state for, I think, 12 at this point, working in various capacities with KDHE, but this is the first time I've worked with KDOT. And I am an MP liaison as well, so I work primarily with Topeka, Manhattan, or the Flint Hills area, and Wichita. And I also help the bike and pedestrian coordinator and with grants and just kind of various things. So that's pretty much what I do here at KDOT.
Yeah, and I'm Matt Messina. I'm our transportation planning manager, and I oversee some MPO activities, public transit, bicycle and pedestrian programs, and now electric vehicle efforts. And I just want to say thanks for everybody for joining today. This is kind of a somewhat newish practice for us to, think of a topic that really needs to be readdressed in either a refresher course to people that have been managing procurement in the past, or an introduction to new staff at MPOs that are responsible for procurement. So Christy and Allison have put this together today, and we'll make everything available after today on our website and send you an email alerting you to where to access it.
Okay, I'm going to share my screen, turn off my video, and feel free to turn off yours as well if you like. And I'm going to share a PowerPoint here with you guys. Okay. We're going to kind of keep this a little informal too. Christy and I'm going to start off, and then Christy will take over. And then at the end, we are going to leave time for some questions and answers for whatever may crop up through the course of the refresher. If you have any questions that come up during the course of the session, Feel free to hold on to them in your brain or put them in the chat box, and then Christy and I will grab them and answer them at the end of the session. And it's not a long course, course by any means. And I did send out the guidance ahead of time. If you were able to peruse it and get any questions ahead of time, that is more than okay. And so I tend to talk fast, so I will do my best to go slow as far as I can, as much as I can. So everybody, good morning from wherever you're coming from, your office, your dining room, Starbucks, wherever it may be. So, because everybody's got a unique situation right now. The purpose of this refresher is just to go over a few, and I will say minor changes to the procurement guidance. This was last updated in 2018. But so it's been a little while. We just wanted to freshen it up, reflect a few minor changes that we've made. And then, and primarily this is what Christy will go over, is just some reminders that we've seen. We wanted to take an opportunity to, while we had everybody together, just to go over some things that we've been seeing and just give out some reminders, particularly to the MPO staff that gather and put together billings and that sort of thing. So to go over that and just to allow some time for question and answers over all of this stuff. Somebody may have a question that somebody else is thinking about, but doesn't want to take the time to ask and just go over all that. So big group session here. I sent out to everybody the KDOT procurement guidance on consolidated planning grant funded consultant services and goods. I sent that out to everyone. That was updated. But to WAMPO folks and MARC folks, I also sent out the procurement guidance for CMAQ, STP, TA funded, and long words there, but just basically the non-infrastructure guidance. So there's two sets. And in the next slide, I will show you, yes, there's two versions of the guidance. Some of you didn't get both of them, and that is because you don't get in your region yet, and I will explain that in a moment. You don't get currently suballocated funds, TA, CMAQ, and STP. So the CPG version is for the MPOs, obviously, because you get your planning funds. And the TMAs get the sub-allocated funding to program. And those two MPOs can, and some do, use some of that funding for non-infrastructure projects like air quality public education, rideshare, planning projects, like planning walkable places, planning sustainable places, that sort of thing. And in that guidance, the only difference between the two is that the non-infrastructure guidance includes project development with, usually it's with me or Renee when she had WAMPO. It's how to get your project built within KDOT and obligated and that sort of thing. But that guidance is also sent to local jurisdictions that use suballocated funds for what I lovingly call the touchy-feely projects, the non-infrastructure projects. So we needed some other guidance that didn't use planning speak, MPO speak, that sort of thing. So that's why there's two different sets of guidance and stuff. So the MPO version uses, your typical MPO terminology, MPO versus local project sponsor, MPO liaison versus KDOT project manager, that sort of thing. That's really the only difference between the two guidance. Everything else is identical. As far as requirements, rules, the processes, that sort of thing, except a few pages in the beginning that says, hey, I need your 1312. We got to do your environmental clearance, the agreement process, that sort of thing. So not leaving you out for our small MPOs. But here's what I promised I would tell you. In the new bipartisan infrastructure law, the small MPOs will be getting suballocated funding. We're not sure when that funding will start coming in, what federal fiscal year, but that will start being integrated into your process. So the rules and the nitty gritty and that sort of thing, of course, will be determined with future guidance. So that remains to be seen. So you may end up needing the non-infrastructure guidance. We'll see how that comes out and that sort of thing. So that may be headed your way. So we'll see how that comes. So in the guidance, in one of the first pages, there is a list of changes. Mostly in the guidance, it's small, little, tiny things, grammar, that sort of thing. We've kind of labeled what we're going to talk about as a change, a clarification, and a reminder. Those are kind of the three categories that we've said. I call this a change. Now, saying that it's not a huge change. In the guidance, it's kind of still in there, but reading this in the 2018 guidance, I looked at it and said, hey, this is in there. You still kind of had to do this, but realized that there wasn't anything in the guidance that made you do this. There was no trigger saying, hey, Mark, you need to do this. And that was, I would say, kind of a fault of the guidance, a huge void in the guidance. So we talked to the Office of Civil Rights and kind of hashed out a good starting point to say, hey, how are we going to deal with this? Because we had a couple of situations that in this threshold, because there's small, medium, and formal procurements. How are we going to oversee these mid-level procurements? This is a tricky threshold in the procurement levels to deal with as far as DBE goals and oversight are considered. So what we've done as far as change is put a little more onus on MPOs as far as helping us determine whether or not a DBE goal needs to be on these projects. So, and I will kind of read this as well too. The MPO is going, and it says shall because it's a shall, not should. The MPO shall evaluate the subcontracting opportunities in their project or scope of work. So this means if you're going to issue a project within this threshold greater than 5,000 but less than or equal to 25,000, you all need to look at your project scope and all the activities and see, is anything in this project something that could be subcontracted out by the prime? And if so, we'll go over the process in a moment, but if so, you need to take a look at it and we need to evaluate it for, KDOT will need to evaluate it for subcontracting opportunities. And so that's it's going to be a little different than before. Before, this is what you were supposed to do, but there was nothing saying you have to. It was just kind of a, you should, it'd be a really good idea. Please think about, nothing kind of firm. So we wanted to give some better clarity for you all on what to look for, because we realized it's kind of hard to figure out perhaps what might be some good subcontracting opportunities in this level. So some examples that we've seen that are good DBE participating activities. And this is not meant to be all inclusive here. Marketing. In our world of planning, public participation in this part of the state. There's lots of firms that do public participation and marketing. Traffic engineering, traffic counting, printing services, surveying, as in getting people's opinions and thoughts and that sort of thing, and multimodal planning. Those are examples of businesses in this area that are DBEs that are available to do work. So when you're evaluating, if you see any work that's suitable for a DBE subcontracting opportunity, you need to submit that RFP like you would during a formal procurement procedure to your liaison with your notice to proceed with RFP, and then we will evaluate it with the Office of Civil Rights to see if there's really any subcontracting, if it's worth putting a goal on. Now, that range, 5,000 to 25,000. I'll be honest with you, a $5,000 project in this mid-level procurement, a $5,000 project is probably not likely to be one that's going to have a DBE goal on it. It's also probably one that's not really going to have any subcontracting opportunities at that dollar value, just to be honest. But a project that's $23,000, it very well might. We need to look at those opportunities on that project to be fair in our DBE subcontracting world, which is why we're looking at this more strongly, because we need to be giving DBEs all the opportunities that we can. So it, like I said, it's a tough range to look at. So this is the process. So say Christy gets something in this range to look at and consults with Deb Dillner in civil rights, and she says, hey, probably, I don't know that we really have any businesses that could do this work. We don't need to put a goal on it. She will send that back to her MPO and say, don't need to put a goal on it. Your MPO can proceed with their own procurement process. That's fine. You're golden. You're okay. Proceed. On the other hand, there may be subcontracting opportunities. There may be a handful of DBEs that could do the work. And she says we need to put a 10% goal on it. That mid-level becomes a formal procurement. And then it becomes a formal procurement and goes through the process that you've been used to. And then we do the DBE process and everything. So that is how that will work. Now, here's the stick that we've had to add so that we are able to ensure that all of this happens. We're assuming that we won't ever have to do this. But just in case, this is what civil rights wanted us to include. Just in case, if KDOT becomes aware of a scope of work in this threshold that had subcontracting opportunities. The MPO didn't run this through us, but we find out later, say reviewing your billings, oh, this procurement happened and there was subcontracting, how come we didn't see it? Then the MPO will need to have their other procurements that year all run through us as formal procurements so that we can have increased oversight and make sure everything's cruising along like it's supposed to. Of course, we're assuming this isn't going to happen. So, and hopefully it won't. You all tend to not procure things too often that are in this level. Generally, they're all bigger dollar values, but it's in here to cover everything within the realm of possibility. So that's kind of where we're at with that. It's a change, but not a huge change. So that's where we're going to be on that. On to post-procurement. Simple procurements really haven't changed.
Allison, if we
Yes.
can, before we get into this, can we address a question that we received in the chat real quick? So
Okay, we were gonna hold them till the very end, but I guess so.
From Daryl, does the MPO or KDOT or collaboration decide if there are DBE contracting opportunities for the 5K to the 25K?
First, we want the MPO to look at if there's DBE subcontracting opportunities, and then to send them to us to look at if they feel there are. And if they're not sure, just to informally go ahead and send them to their MPO person. It's always better to be safe than sorry. And I know Christy and I are both very responsive in getting back if there's any questions.
I would say if you're not quite sure, then talk to your MPO liaison and we can kind of hash it out. But we are going to initially expect for the MPO to review their scope of work to see if they believe that there are any DBE contracting opportunities. So MPOs will do the first review, but if you're just not really sure, then I would say contact your MPO liaison and then we can work through that.
But like those categories that we use as an example, those right there, if those categories are included, that's going to be an automatic yes. Just because those are ones we've had experience with, and I know that are in the universe of DBE firms willing and able to do the work off of our DBE directory. There could be other categories, potentially. Those are just the ones have had experience with. And I mean, I could rattle off firms, but that probably wouldn't be the most appropriate thing. But those are the ones that we tend to see more frequently, that civil rights puts goals on projects on because of those types of work in the recent years.
All right, great. I think that addresses it.
Okay. All right. And we can always talk more if somebody has more questions. But as always, like Christy said, email us and we will be more than happy to help. So, okay. For simple and mid levels that say Christy and I don't have direct oversight with, there's information for this wonderful DBE report that I have to submit. Formal procurement, these boxes right here, Christy and I get that information through the formal procurement process and everything. So we get that information so I can fill out the report. But when you do a simple or mid-level without KDOT oversight, I don't have a chance to get this information. So, but I still need it for the report. So there will be, in the near future, just a quick, really simple PDF coming out that will collect this information from you after you do a simple or mid-level procurement, so that we can get this information. Just really simple. So it's information that we gather from your DBE payment information forms. So just real simple, not a big deal. But I did want to mention it, that it will come out so that we can get this information. Because I have to do this utilization report twice a year. So when I'm bugging you all for your payment information forms, this is part of the information that I'm needing. And I say change. You all were made aware previously of this change, but it's been put in the guidance now. For DBE certification, all firms that are proposing to do work on a project as a DBE must be certified as a DBE in Kansas when the proposal is submitted to the MPO. So whatever your RFP due date is, by that date, the DBE must be certified. The MPO liaison will confirm the eligibility of, now the DBE could also be a prime or it could be a sub. The liaison will confirm that when we get your notice to proceed with interviews. So we will be checking. So no longer are we able to have we been, and so this has been in place for several months with the Office of Civil Rights changed, or I shouldn't say changed, with their clarified interpretation of the rules. We can't wait till contract time and that sort of thing for the firm to be certified in Kansas. So, and I think everybody's been fine on this lately. But I just wanted to mention that it had been, since we were updating the guidance, it had been put in the guidance. So that's in there. An additional clarification in the guidance is, what if a DBE exits the project? Because we've had some questions about that. And this rarely happens. And I think I've had it once in my career. But if a DBE is terminated, goes out of business, just isn't going to work on the contract, the prime must make a good faith effort to find a replacement DBE to finish out the work that the DBE was going to do on the contract. So you, the MPO, has 5 working days to provide KDOT with a written good faith effort documentation if you can't find a replacement DBE. So you go out and you try to find another DBE firm that can do the work to still satisfy the DBE goal. And if you can't, in the guidance, there's further information about the documentation and the process that you would need to go through, because you're still expected to fulfill the goal of course, and make a good faith effort to do so. But we also realize that timing, for one, of losing a DBE within the course of your project would affect the ability, because it may happen towards the end of the project. Who knows what crazy stuff may happen, or the other DBE firms might just not be able to take on additional work. So whatever the case might be, there is a process in place to handle that. So we did clarify what needs to happen that wasn't fleshed out as well as it should have been in the guidance. So hopefully that helps.
And Allison,
Yes,
I
ma'am.
also want to include that on pages 9 and 10 of the document is where you'll find that good faith effort process.
Okay, thank you.
In case you guys are looking for it, it's on pages 9 and 10 of the guidance document.
Okay. Also related to DBEs, and this also happens sometimes, if your MPO if you become aware of any significant changes that affect the full payment of the contract amount that you've signed or the prime assigned with the DBE, you guys need to make sure you contact your liaison so that you can talk about the change and what kind of remedy, what kind of solution needs to happen. So, and I have it underlined there. I know Christy and I monitor the project and the progress of the DBE payments in multiple ways. The prompt payment form is one of them, which is why it's so vital to get those on time, which will be talked about later on in this. And then you all should be monitoring the DBE payments and progress as it goes along. But sometimes whatever work the DBE is going to do on a project, it just doesn't take as long as was estimated. Or some of the work wasn't needed, or whatever the situation might be. But everybody should be tracking that as you go along. And you get to the end of the study, or even 3/4 of the way, and you realize, hey, it's not going to take as much. Christy and I need to talk about that with you guys early on so we can figure out what needs to be done. And when you get to the end of the project, we really need to deal with that. But at the end of the project, there needs to be, the MPO needs to provide at KDOT with a written justification explaining what happened at the very end. But prior to that, we need to figure out a remedy. Is there something else in the project that the DBE could do to fulfill that contract amount? Can we shift some work? Is there something else in the scope that they can do? Something else. And I say significant. There's not a dollar amount or a percentage threshold that I could say. It's it's just something we all need to talk about, with your liaison. I usually kind of do the sniff test. It's very vague, and I'm sorry, but I personally, with my projects, look at it and say, is it a $5,000 contract and there's only $100 left? Okay, that's not a big deal. If it's a $5,000 contract and the DBE is getting shorted $1,000, that's a big deal. So it's just something to be aware of. It's something that needs communication as the project is going along. Bottom line is we need to make sure that the DBE's contract is getting fulfilled and they're not getting shorted work that and income that they expected to get. So close monitoring of the situation by both the MPO and us overseeing the project at KDOT is very important, and making sure that KDOT gets the written justification, because we have to also include that in our closeout of the project to civil rights, so that they have that in their files in case something, a complaint is made to them, so that they have that to deal with the situation. So that is what we need. And then that also ties in with the final payment affidavit that we're coming up to next. A relatively new form, so you all may not be quite as used to turning that in, but Christy and I have a checklist, and that's on the checklist. So just encourage you all to get that into your checklist to make sure that that gets turned in with your quarterly and monthly billings. I don't make final payments on projects until I get this in. So please make sure you do it. And one thing I will toss in, Christy and I can share the good news that these are all being made into all of our forms here, the notice proceeds, info forms, this one, everything. Christy has gained a wonderful skill in making everything a fillable form. So these are all going to be fillable forms, and they're all on our MPO webpage on the KDOT website, which we'll also send out as a link. So they can all be downloaded and filled out. It will make everything so much easier. So thank you, Christy.
You're very welcome. This was kind of a spoiler alert type of thing for a couple of my MPOs that I've talked to. I was like, we've got some really exciting news. And I'm excited about this because that way you guys don't have to guess of which is the current form. You can actually go out to the MPO or MPO website and download the latest form.
Which is perfect. But that still means please, please, please don't change your forms. They're
that will be coming up, yes.
Yes. I will say it and then Christy will say it. Please don't change our forms. They're like that for a reason. They're kind of like legal documents, so we can't say that enough. So now we're to the reminder section of our refresher. I get to do the KDOT travel policy. And here's a few things to remember. I know this is probably new. Well, all of this is new to some people. It's the travel policy that I send out at the beginning of the year. It's applicable to consultants. So any of your consultant project contracts, that's who this applies to. For your MPO staff, you follow your own agency's or your host agency's policy regarding staff travel, which, you know, we've already reviewed. I've reviewed City of Lawrence, I've reviewed Marks, Christie's reviewed Flint Hills, that sort of thing. Just want to make that really clear. Meals are allowable for consultants only if there's overnight travel involved. If they're traveling from Nebraska to Wichita to do a presentation, then driving back that same day, unfortunately, we're not allowed to pay for their McDonald's. Christy, Matt, and I don't make the rules. We just have to enforce them. Unfortunately, that's where we're at. Receipts are required for all travel related expenses in order to be reimbursed. KDOT rules, they got to be in there. Please make sure in your billings that all documentation and receipts for travel are organized, and preferably, and I will say this probably for Christy, that they're itemized so that we can easily in our reviews of your billings, because it's so much faster and you'll get reimbursed so much faster if they're easily discernible, and because that way we can go through them and get things checked off and get you paid a lot and reimbursed a lot easier. That would be a tremendous help.
Something in addition to that, could you go back to the previous slide? Also, something that I've kind of seen as I've gone through some of the reimbursements, the reimbursement, what you're asking for as far as payment, needs to match the types of receipts that you turn in. They need to sync up. So what I've seen is like a receipt, or somebody's asking for $24 for a meal, but when you look at the receipt, it only has $20 on it. Well, I could guess that that is a tip. And that's why it's $24, but that's a guess without it actually being verified. $20 is really all you have information on. So make sure, especially with your receipts for meals, that if you do a tip, you might want to put that tip amount on the receipt, so then you don't have to think about it again, but it's there. And we also know we can sync them up with what you're asking for.
Good point. And I will just say, everybody knows this, but it happens every once in a while. It slips. No booze. It happens. We will all start traveling again once the pandemic calms down, but it happens. It slips into a receipt. Best thing to do if you don't do per diem is to have them bill you on a separate receipt. Just makes everybody's life a lot easier. Okay. DBE payment info forms. Like I said, this goes into the DBE utilization report that I have to do to the Office of Civil Rights. This message got out to some MPOs and not others, so I don't know, but since I have everybody here, the simple and mid-level procurements, those contract payments, they all need to be on the DBE payment info forms, in addition to the formal level procurement payments. That's something that Civil Rights requested, that they all be on there. So just a reminder, if we could please make sure they're all on there. And I'll have the information that I need from the form that Christy and I are going to put together and send out, which that form will be added to our webpage. So if we could just make sure those all get on there. So if you haven't been doing that, let's make sure we start doing that now. And that includes all DBE and non-DBE firms. So everybody does a good job with DBE and non-DBE firms. Everybody makes sure that those are on there, but simple and mid-levels. And one thing I wanted to clarify, the column on that form that's cumulative consultant payments, that is the amount cumulative over the life of the entire contract. It's not the cumulative amount for that year. So that column that I have circled there. So any project or a project with a 2-year, $15,000 annual amount should have in their very final DBE form where you mark closed, it's going to have 30,000 or $29,800 or whatever, rather than just that 1 year amount. So, because that's a reportable item on my report. So that has been a subject of confusion clear across the board. So just want to clarify entire project in that cumulative amount. All right, take it away, Christy.
Okay, so since we're kind of running short on time and we do want to leave some time for questions, hopefully I'll be able to kind of go through these fairly quickly. So we're looking at the prompt payment clause, and so this clause must be included in all contracts. These clauses that we're talking about right now can be found on page 11 of the guidance document. They need to be included in contracts between the MPO and a prime consultant, and we also have another clause to be included in contracts between the prime consultant and the subconsultants. So there are different clauses for different reasons, and they're all on page 11, and these we will be looking for those in your contracts with your prime consultant and then between the prime and the subconsultants. If we don't see that, we will have to make you go back and do that because this is a requirement. So we just wanted to make sure to remind you that as you do your contracts and you have subconsultants and they subcontract out as well, that we are going to be looking for these clauses, and that could hold you up if you don't have those in there. Okay, next slide. Okay, so prompt payment forms, and I've been kind of reading in the chat some questions, so this may answer a question that's in the chat. We are still doing prompt payment forms. The final DBE form is for your final payment to your DBE, but we still are doing prompt payment forms as well. And these forms are used to make sure that that primes are paying their subconsultants in a prompt way, basically, and that's what the language is for. So it's submitted by the prime consultant for all subconsultants to show timely payments. And that is for all the subconsultants. So DBE or non-DBE, they need to be included in this. Be sure to send in payment forms for projects with quarterly and monthly billings. So, and then final payment in your billing can be withheld if we don't receive these. So note that we track receipts and amounts and we reconcile. So we are looking for these forms. They should be being sent in as you also send in the reimbursement request for this. And, you know, if we don't see them, that could hold up payment. So as you're getting reimbursements from your subconsultants or from your prime and their subconsultants, you want to make sure that those prompt payment forms are also coming in as well, because we'll be asking for them. We do look for those. All right, so the next slide. Okay, so here's some reminders. Mileage and federal rate is allowable. Okay, so when you're talking about mileage, you need to have the state number of you have to state the number of miles, the rate, and the purpose of travel to support the reimbursement. So you can't just say, okay, here is the amount of money you owe me. There you go. You have to be able to provide some verification of how you arrived at the mileage that you're stating. So, and if you're really good, and one of my MPOs can pat yourselves on the back for this, you can add the start and ending odometer readings, which will let us know exactly how you came up with that mileage. So just kind of a hint in there. The second one is documentation of all staff and consultant time to fully support the reimbursement claim is required. Without documentation to verify these charges, KDOT will not be able to reimburse those charges. Basically what that means is you have a sheet that says this is what we want to be reimbursed for, itemized. We are looking for the documentation that you send in to us along with this request that shows us how you came up with those numbers. So if you don't have that information there, we're going to have questions, and that's going to hold up your payment. So you need to make sure that you're sending in documentation for everything that you're asking for reimbursement for, and that we can easily discern how you arrived at your numbers. That's very important. The next one, receipts must accompany all travel and direct expense claims for reimbursement. Once again, we kind of talked about that with travel on the prior slide, but whatever you ask for, you need to make sure that whatever you're sending into us, the documentation to support that clearly shows how you came up with what you're asking to be reimbursed for. And then the final bullet, progress reports must be submitted by consultant summarizing milestones and events during each billing period, which means that for those consultant contracts and even for the ones they subconsult with, not only do we need to know the hours and the rate and how much they're charging for, we also need to know what they spent their time on. So we are looking for those progress reports so that we know, yes, these consultants have worked on this, but we need to know what they've worked on, what their activities are. Next slide. Okay, some general reminders here. In the notice of awards, that form, KDOT must have scope of work and detailed budget and fee sheets to review with the contracts in order to approve and issue the notice of award. What that means is that those notice to proceeds or the notice to award forms, those are like the cover sheet for the information that you are sending to us so that we can look through the information, make sure that everything's kosher on the state side, all of our check boxes are checked before you proceed with going forward with what you're getting ready to do. For the notice to award, part of that is including scope of work, budget, and fee sheets. So I will give you an example. I did receive a contract or a potential contract, and I was reviewing it, and the budget was personnel and an amount, public participation and an amount. That it had no breakdown to it so that I could tell how they came up with their numbers. So that to me is not a budget. We need to have some more information in that budget to show us how those figures were calculated, because until we can see that or we can verify that, it's going to be really hard to sign off on a notice to award. So that's just kind of a reminder to you that this information needs to have enough detail so that we know how they're coming up with what they're coming up with, and so that you know that too. The next bullet is be sure to send in all contracts between Tribe and some subconsultants in a timely manner and copies of any supplementals done. So once again, that is, you send us the contract with your prime consultant and you send us the contracts between the prime and the subconsultants. We want to have all of that in our files so that we have the paper trail. The next one, there must not be any tailoring or altering of KDOT forms. This is a big one. If you want to do that on your own for your own purposes, that's fine. But when you turn them into us, it needs to be on the forms that we have approved. I did have a prompt payment form come in that had all of the language stripped out of it about prompt payment, and also the date when the subconsultants were paid. Well, that's no longer our form anymore. And that will pop a red flag very fast when somebody alters a form. So please make sure that you're using the forms that we give you, because those are the approved forms. And then for all notice forms, fill out only the sections that pertain to your organization. Do not fill out the sections that is for KDOT use only, including the signature and the date. That is a cover sheet where you put the information on the top, and then we will put that information on the bottom under the KDOT use only section. We sign and date that because that's basically saying we've reviewed everything, you have permission, go for it. So make sure that you're not you're not filling out the entire form because then we have to send it back to you in order to alter that. So just make sure you're filling out the portions that you need to fill out. Next slide. All right. So
okay, I'm going to stop sharing.
All right. We do have some time for some questions, and I'm looking in the chat box. So I believe, Beth, let me know if we didn't answer your question about the final DBE payment affidavit replacing the previous prompt payment forms. It's going to be both. You'll have a final DBE payment when you make the final payment for that DBE, but you'll also be turning in the prompt payment forms as well as it goes along.
Yeah, that's clear. It's just on the slide, it was saying monthly or quarterly billing, and you had the final DBE payment affidavit form up. And so it was like, wait a second, are we like into that one? Or so gotcha. That helps. Thanks.
Okay. And then the next question is from Doug, and I think the question may have been cut off a little bit, so I'm going to try to read this and make sure that I've got the whole thing. If we have one of these $5,000 to $25,000 projects and think that some part of it could be done by a DBE, even though the applicant wants and is capable of doing all the work themselves without any subconsultants, do we need to potentially force them to subcontract out a portion of the work? Let's see if I can read. I can see where doing this would affect the contract value and desirability of pursuing an opportunity. And I believe if there was more to that, please let me know.
Do you want me to take that, Christy?
Yes, please.
If there are subcontracting opportunities, then we have Office of Civil Rights. I don't want to say have to, but if there are subcontracting opportunities and there are, we call it a universe. There's opportunities and there are firms in the universe of our DBE directory that are available to do the work, then a goal will be put on the project. So we can't make them get a DBE, but all the same, if a goal is put on the project and they don't put a DBE on, then they have to go through a good faith effort approval process on the project and get approval for why they're not putting a DBE on the project. I have yet to have to go through that. I know what's involved because it's in the guidance, but don't have firsthand experience in having to go through that. So I can't say that it's happened. If there's a goal on a project, the prime consultant goes out of their way to meet it because they want the work. So we would take that as it comes. Generally, they still want the work. So
so the short answer then is a yes. Is that what I'm hearing? So if there's a potential, even though they want to do it themselves, they can't use that as an exemption request. They would still have to carve something out to meet a DBE goal.
Yeah. Now, if there's no, we wouldn't put a goal on the project unless we saw subcontracting opportunities. So, and because of the project I manage for you, I generally your projects don't need goals, but for the most part. So we look at it singularly. So
Allison, there was another question about DBEs.
Before we move on, could I kind of help clarify so I understand?
Yeah.
So the process has always been that we send you guys the scope prior to advertising. So when we send you the scope prior to advertising, review it, will you make that determination then if there should be if a scope should be broken out that there's contracting DBE opportunities? Is that when you'll make that determination?
Yeah.
So then you'll set the goal then, and then we'll know when we advertise that there's a goal, and primes will know at that point.
Yeah. The real difference with these mid-levels is that there wasn't a trigger to have you send them to us or to even look at it. So we really wanted to add something in the guidance to get you all thinking and looking at it, to be able to integrate that DBE to really get that happening, to spark that, was really our intention with the guidance.
I understand. I guess the question is then that everything pretty much has to go through KDOT prior to advertising then. Even 5 mid-levels, you would still have to review those before we advertise.
Yeah, both mid-levels, we want you guys to look at it first and see what you all think. Using those categories that we spelled out there. Now, if you just want to send them to us to look at first, that's more than okay. We didn't want to automatically make all of those formal procurements
Mm-hmm.
right off the bat. Because even generally, like I said, like a $5,000 or $7,000 project really is probably not going to have any subcontracting opportunities.
Correct.
But a $23,000 project is probably more likely than not. It may have some subcontracting opportunities.
Yeah, I don't want to keep beating a dead horse, but I
Yeah.
think part of the problem is here at Mark, we don't have a problem because we have a DBE program. I think some of the smaller MPOs might have an issue trying to figure out, okay, is this a contracting opportunity and how much of it should be? And then they're supposed to make that decision before they send it to you. And KDOT should make that determination on what that DBE goal should be because you're asking the smaller MPOs to create a DBE goal that they don't have.
No,
or the
they're
process.
they're not going to set a goal. To be clear, the small MPOs are not setting the goal. They're just looking to say, hey, are there opportunities? And identifying, hey, are there public participation opportunities? Is there marketing? And say, hey, okay, they're not actually going to be setting the goals. They're going to say, hey, are there these kind of activities? And if I could, Stephanie, because I've worked with you a lot here. Stephanie's going to say, hey, I'm going to do this project. There's some traffic engineering. Okay, I better send this to Christy to have her look at. And before I start it's a $20,000 project, a real simple, fast, quick thing. I better send this to Christy to have it looked at for a DBE goal because I don't want to get in trouble. I don't want all my procurement stuff to have to be a formal procurement all year. I got some activities on down the road in the end of the year. So Christy's going to get it and say, okay, I'll send this to Deb Dillner for procurement review. Yeah, there's 3 firms in our universe that could do the work. So it gets a goal on it and everything. Stephanie's not putting the DBE goal on it. She's just looking at it and saying, okay, I need to send it to Christy for review. Alternatively, Stephanie looks at it and says, it's just a $20,000 project. There's no marketing. There's no public participation. It's just a real simple, quick and dirty study. There's nothing to subcontract. I feel comfortable that I can just do my own procurement in this. There's no subcontracting whatsoever. She goes forth and does her MPO approved procurement. She's good. So she's not going to ever be setting her own DBE goals. Neither are you, Daryl. I'll be setting your goals with KDOT procurement on anything mid-level that you do. It's purely looking for DBE goals. We want you guys to do that work first to help us identify. At any point, if Stephanie's not sure about subcontracting opportunities, she's going to shoot Christy a quick email with that scope of work and see what Christy thinks and go forth if she's not sure. But that's really what it boils down to.
It's kind of making sure that that we aren't boxing out potential work for DBEs, and we don't intend to do that, but sometimes just kind of the way the process goes, we might be unintentionally boxing some DBEs out. And so we're just trying to make sure that we catch those opportunities so nobody can say, well, we just didn't have a fair shot. We're going to ask you to kind of help us know when you have a contract that might have those potential things in there. It may work, it may not. Once we send it on to our people, they may say, no, we don't think so. But it's just catching those opportunities so that we can say we gave everybody a fair shot.
And I will pause for just a moment and say, if anybody has to drop from the conversation, feel free, and we will send the recording and everything as promised. So we understand if people have to drop.
We also have another question in the chat box.
Yes.
Okay.
For DBE underruns, is it possible to have a rule of thumb? Doug, I wish I could, but even in construction land, there's not a rule of thumb. It's really, I wish I could. Like I said, if it's nebulous. And Christy and I talked about this yesterday as we were finishing our preparation. If it's, let's say a large amount, it really depends on the dollar value of the project. If you have $100,000 project and it's $1,000, probably not a big deal. So there's not a rule of thumb. I've gone through construction projects guidance, and there's not one that I can give you from their guidance even. So I will say generally it's not a huge problem if everybody monitors things as we go along. But the key is we don't want a DBE we don't want a complaint ever, first of all. And we want to have a good faith effort to avoid those. So let's just do our best to avoid those and to act in good faith towards our DBEs and support them. So if there's an issue that we need to work on resolving, and we need to figure out a specific dollar amount or threshold, I will have to work with civil rights, but my thought is that there's not a dollar amount for a good reason. So I wish I could tell you something more, but if I need to pursue it with civil rights, I will. But let's set that aside until there's an issue.
I'm not seeing any further questions in the chat box. Are there any further questions that anybody wants to unmute for? Going once, going twice. All right, closed. Any final words, Allison? Oh, I don't know.
I
Besides, thank
don't.
you. Yeah. Besides, thank you for joining us and letting us kind of give you some of these updates.
I think Christy and I would welcome feedback if these types of refreshers. I realize this one went a little long. I'm sorry. I thought it'd be a little shorter. Not quite as wordy. But if there's a topic that MPO staff / others that help us do all this work feel like you need a refresher or not even a refresher, an intro course on, please let us know, because we're happy to put something together and do this on. Because I know Campo's not meeting all the time, and we're happy to put a PowerPoint and or have a conversation with. It's not a big deal for us to do. I know Christy and I and Matt, or even if there's another area of KDOT or whatever the case might be, we're happy to do this, especially as the IIJA or bill is coming on board. There'll be all kinds of new stuff for us to do. So we're more than happy to put that together and do these little sessions as they come up. So don't be afraid to ask us. We'll put something together, and if it's a topic you guys are another MPO is interested in, we'll just send out the invite and you can join. So
And if you have any further questions on what we covered today, feel free to reach out to whoever you're assigned to, your liaison, for further information. And we'll just go from there. So,
Matt, do you have any final words?
Yeah, I just wanted to thank everybody for their time today, and glad to see that this was helpful for many. Thank you.
Okay. Otherwise, we will sign off, guys.
thank you, everyone. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot. Have a great day.